Okay guys, we're going to try that over again on the iPad instead. I appreciate your patience. That's a bummer that the original plan did not work, but we adapt, right? Let me do something here real quick. All right, can everybody hear me there? Excellent. Okay. So this will be different. We won't have some of the add-ons that I had originally planned on, like the fly tester and stuff, but that's okay. I came here to tie, and that's what you guys came here to watch. So we'll let a few people get on here. I'll kind of start over. So what I'm tying today is a twisted bugger. Anybody that follows me on Instagram or has seen seen any of my twisted buggers uh, on Facebook on some of the pages, this is a twisted bugger in white. And we'll go to the complete opposite spectrum here. This one was tied for steelhead, but in black. So we can tie them, and everything in between does not matter. And as I said before, for those who were watching on the previous live streams, one of my favorite patterns, hands down, not just because of where I live. I think fundamentally, when we start fly tying, we learn a woolly bugger. And when we learn that woolly bugger, there's this like, okay, well, I'm tying my first fly, then I get onto the crazy cool stuff that I see online and what have you. And that's totally, it needs to, number one, be taught the opposite way, and it needs to be approached when you're fishing them and when you're tying them by the beginner or any tyer. Yes, it's a fundamental fly pattern, totally, but it's that fly pattern that's universal. It's worldwide. You could catch some type of a fish on it. It has endless possibilities when it comes to color choice, and it has those effective qualities about it that when I'm fishing for steelhead, when I'm fishing for bass, when I'm fishing for trout, and just about anything else, you're wanting that movement, you're wanting that undulation, the presentation, whether it's a small fly or a big fly, the woolly bugger is universal. It's classic. It's timeless. Yes, it's a great beginner pattern because of the structure of it. You have a tail, a body, a hackle. It teaches you thread control. It teaches you material manipulation and all of that. But I urge anybody that's beginning fly tying, and then those that have been doing it their whole life, to look at it as a pattern that's for your box for life. And that's how I look at it. So if you were to look through like my Instagram feed or look at a lot of what I post on Facebook pages, you'll notice I do a lot of woolly buggers, and it's for a good reason. So for instance, the twisted bugger, that's just like any pattern, is a culmination of many different woolly bugger style flies. So the classic woolly bugger, a complex twist bugger, by Clark Pierce, I believe, with Fly Fish Food. And then it has other things that are qualities that I like about different streamers. So that's the reason that I love this fly. I love it also because I can change up the colors to pretty much whatever I want. So some examples of that. If I was up in the Puget Sound fishing for sea run cuts, or maybe even steelhead, I have this option. So it's the Spawn Southern Peach tail, Marabou, and some orange. So kind of shrimpy, right? If I'm fishing steelhead and I want that egg-sucking leech look, we can tie it in that. If we want the classic olive and copper, you can tie it in olive and copper. So my point being, it's endless. The techniques remain the same. The process remains the same. Another good one, a good example, is kind of a crawfish imitation, tied on a 90-degree PR374 from Arex in some crawfish colors. So, the reason I like tying it and the reason that my box is full of them is because I feel like, and I apologize for the repetition for those that were bearing with me in the beginning, but the reason that I love this pattern is because when you sit and you're on a lake or you're on a river and you don't have fish keying in on one particular hatch or subsurface activity of any kind, right? And you're, gosh, man, I've gone through 10 patterns. I have not hooked into anything. This is ridiculous. And you're looking for that pattern to start searching. The twisted bugger is that pattern. It is for me. So I like to have them in a multitude of colors. If I'm fishing, excuse me, if I'm fishing in that 1 to 15 foot range in the water column, my olives, my white, my black and red, like a little Fort Leach type color combination, and brown would be awesome. But then let's say that I'm out in the middle of the lake or I'm near the dam and I know I'm in deep water, in that 30 to 70 foot range. You could throw on purple. Excellent color for deep water. It's excellent actually in any part of the water column, period. But my point being is my understanding as far as how fish see color, that blue violet color spectrum is seen best down low. So I tie a lot of black and purple. I don't have one with me right now, but if you guys look through certain posts I've done on Facebook or Instagram, you'll see I do one that's black top and purple bottom for the tail, and that the body is purple and the hackle is black. That's one of my favorites. Purple is so underrated. Not just this pattern, anything. You see a lot of the classic steelhead flies had a lot of purple chenilles, purple collars. You look at a lot of the egg-sucking leeches for steelhead with that kind of pink or orange egg, if you will, or head, and then a purple zonker body. Purple is just a great color, and I think it's underrated for bass as well. So this would be a go-to if I was sitting there on a lake, especially. And I was cruising the shallows. I wasn't getting them on the olives, the blacks, the white. And I'm like, let's head towards the dam, or let's hit the middle of the lake. Maybe it's hot out. Maybe they're low. Purple. So the fly that I'm going to start with today is going to be black. We're going to go over not only just how to tie the fly, but why I tie the fly this way. And it is a bummer, yes, that the original plan for this live feed did not pan out the way it did, but that's okay. I was going to have a camera on the fly tester. When I did a couple tests for the live stream, it worked well. It didn't when I went to do the actual live. So we'll do some video uploads maybe this week on YouTube and Facebook and such. I'll send Tim and Tyler a video to follow up on this, to post to the Norvise Facebook page so you guys can see what this fly looks like in the actual water under current. But let's start tying this guy and we'll go from there. So hook. This is an Ahrex TP605. It's their Trout Predator series. This is the short shank. The TP610 is a thicker version of this, wire-wise. And the TP615 is a little bit longer. All of them will work fine. I tie for Ahrex for a number of reasons. I do find them to be the highest quality hook for just about anything I tie, and the largest variety. So we are going to be talking about Ahrex today. Guys, if I don't care what streamer hook you have, it will work for this pattern. The key elements to it are a slightly longer hook shank and a slightly bigger fly profile in and of itself. So the reason I like the Trout Predator series of hooks from Ahrex is they have a large gap. As we stack a bunch of body material on this, right, this gap gets smaller and smaller. So somebody here, Jock, you just mentioned striped bass. Striped bass, larger species, largemouth bass, some smallies if you're getting into larger, and then large trout. They're going after this thing because they're predators. They're not sitting there going, oh, a leech. Oh, it's a caddis dry. It's a caddis emerger. Oh, it's a calabatus emerger. They don't think of it that way. They're seeing this thing. It's flashy. It's large. it's moving fast. They're slightly pissed off maybe, depending on the time of year and where you're presenting this fly, and they're going to hit it, and they're going to hit it fast, and they hit it hard, and having this larger hook gap is very important for that. So I find that like in the trout predator series versus like a traditional streamer hook where it may come up to about where my nail is, having this larger gap is really effective for less misstrike. So this here is a 1/4 inch bead. A lot of your manufacturers for bead will call it a large or an extra large. For hairline, this is their 1/4 inch. It's perfect for this. I wouldn't go much smaller because, you know, we're looking at something that we're trying to create a bullet profile. And starting here at the eye and working your way back, we want it to have a big profile. So having that 1/4 inch, this does not add much weight. Our weight comes from our lead wraps, and also it's a crucial part to the actual fly design, adding the lead. So not a ton of weight. It's a pretty thin metal. I use the Trout Predator, the light TP605 for this, and I add my lead weight in different number of wraps for how heavy I want it to be. So starting out, before we even put our thread on the hook, I pull off a piece of our, you can use .025, you could use .030, this is 035, it really doesn't matter. But for still water applications, anywhere from 4, and I'll explain why 4, to 10 wraps of this is what you'll want. So this is what I calculate for if I want a super heavy fly or a super light fly, and I'll show you why. So if I were to do 4 wraps and I were to, let's complete 4, shove it behind this cone to make it stable, I would have enough of this sticking out the back to tie it off. Any less than that, it won't protrude out past the backside of that cone. So for this, I'm going to do 6. I use pliers to crimp it. Anytime I try to wiggle it and pinch it off and stuff, I pull a vise into my lap. I put my pliers or forceps, whatever you have, behind it, and I scoot it forward. So I'm pressing up behind that cone. And the reason I do this is, you know, I look at a lot of coned streamer patterns, and they're tying up to it, all their materials, and then this cone is still floppy. And I don't know if it necessarily has anything to do with the water dynamics around that, if it were to be floppy and chattering, but I want this cone stable, and I want it all one. So from the eye of the hook to the cone to the body to the tail, I want this fly working in unison. And when you see it in a tank, you'll see why I want it that way. So my materials and my thread do not stabilize, I should say, I guess, this cone. The lead does. So it's a good tool. It's a good trick for any of your guys' streamers that you're using a cone on. Shove it up behind, and then we start our thread. So kind of a fun tip there. I use that technique for just about anything that I do with a cone. So I do some thread wraps on top of this tag end, and then behind. Perfect. And cut your tag end. For thread, I use GSPs and NanoSilk. Vivus GSPs are great. Anywhere from 50 to 150 denier. I use 12-aught. You could use pretty much any color on this. When this bobbin here runs out, which is pretty soon, with white, I could use orange. You can use whatever color you want. I do recommend with a lot of these, if you're switching up, because you do have so many color combinations, white is a really useful tool. Buying a bunch of spools of white, you can use a Sharpie when you're tying it off and just do that last like 3 or 4 inches, or anything that's going to be visible. Use a Sharpie that is, you know, close to the color of the body or the head that you want. You know, draw on both sides of it with a Sharpie, and do your whip finish or your half hitches and your head cement, and there's your thread color. So with this pattern, you rarely ever will see thread unless you are a little too crowdy on the cone head. Otherwise, you know, you're not really seeing it. So we're going to take off our tag end here of our lead. Crimp that down. And I noticed that I pulled it back a little bit, so I'm going to shove that forward just one more time. Sorry for any jiggling on the camera. I'm balanced on the table that I'm at, so we're improvising, guys. Okay. So don't need a super big thread body. This is going to be pretty critical where your lead ends and your hook starts and your thread out. So just enough of a thread base there. Don't need to waste a ton of thread, but you do want something that is going to hold those materials. Since we aren't using a bunch of glues or resins or anything, you know, this is a simple fly pattern, but we want something for that to lay on top of. So I usually will do, as you saw, about 4 or 5 wraps, create kind of a ball in the back for thread, and we'll attach our tail. So with the tail, I mentioned before, you know, like this here, this is a smallmouth pattern I tie in crawfish colors on a jig shank. So I like that slightly lighter brown and darker brown for the body. Same thing kind of goes for this cutthroat pattern, more shrimpy colors. For you could use it for steelhead as well. You know, choose your colors, guys. This is so versatile. Whatever fits your needs and your fishing applications, do that. But we're tying black, so I'm going to do black all the way around. And I like this Nature Spirit Blood Quill Marabou, and we're going to pick 2 out. So when I'm choosing Marabou, typically if I was tying a video or doing just a standard live, I would already have these plucked and set aside, but I want to show you guys a few things. So when you look at a Marabou plume, try to find that kind of good in between. So not super sparse, not super bushy. This stuff here where it's kind of fused together, that's going to be pulled anyway, so it doesn't matter. Pick 2 that are like this in whatever color you're going to use. So probably up to about this point, we're going to strip the quill, expose that. So yes, you don't have a ton left, but you're going to use 2 of them. And then a technique that is so easy to do, but really pays dividends for the movement aspect of your fly, is to go about the length of your tail. So say this is going to be, let me do my white t-shirt here, the length of your tail. I'm going to go back on the quill and make a V-cut and pull that out. So yeah, you're losing maybe 20 fibers, but when you form your tail, you don't have a quill running all the way up. Tip, I don't know who taught me it, but it was a very long time ago. You may use 2 plumes when you could have used 1, but the movement is just fantastic and is worth that lost material. So I don't put both of the tails together. I tie them in one at a time. I'll show you why. As many of you know, that feather has a top side and a bottom side, or an underside. I do tie my tails in with the top side up. So I'll stroke the feather back, get a pinch point, that's my tie-in point. Switch hands, tie in your first. I like to pinch and then come around and then secure. Keeps that material on top, whatever you're using. A few securing wraps, okay? Let me take our second feather, same thing. Okay, so strip off that fluff on the bottom. It's just more you have to tie in and control. Come in about the length of your overall tail, cut out that V-notch. If I was able to use the fly tester today, guys, what I was going to show is a fly that has that quill running all the way up, you know, roughly to the tip, and then ones that are cut. And the undulation of a tail, any woolly bugger, anything with the Marabou tail, really try to use this technique. I think it gives more movement. I think the appearance is better. It just has that overall appearance that I want, and you're not losing much at all. So we'll come back in, same thing, top side of the feather up, And the best way to do this is the same technique for the beginning, or the first one we put on, and you'll just kind of get a hang of overlapping. But you want those tips to line up just like so. Come in with your non-bobbin hand. You can kind of look through your fingers here and see if they're still lined up. Just do one loose wrap or two. I usually do two and look at them. So that's pretty good. We can go in now, do those final wraps. Okay, so one of the key elements of this fly is that it's big, it's bulky, it has a lot of body, but there are some techniques on the underbody and these steps following here that are coming up that I think add to the overall profile and just the structure of it. So what I do is I'll pick up those two tags, I'll come forward, ahead of them, I'll wrap up to just behind that lead, pull my quills forward, I spin them together and lay them down right behind that lead and wrap back. So I'm not going to quite build an underbody the thickness of that lead necessarily, but that's kind of the goal, so that I don't have this big old bulky front section where the lead is and then nothing back here. Some people will just cut their Marabou right there. This is just a stronger body, the tail is more secure, and then you're creating a slightly even, more even tapered body. Or not really tapered, more of a cylinder. So there is your, just because of the chatter, I'm going to lock that down for a sec. And then one technique that I like to do is to go under my tail and a couple more securing wraps. So that's how I tie in my tails. Now if you're going to do a two-tone tail, like a lighter color or a darker color on top or bottom, the process would be the exact same. So I tie in two plumes no matter which color or which fly I'm going to tie. When it comes to the twisted bugger, they're all two plumes. Now we want to pick our flash color. And for this here, you could do black. You could do the medium brown, actually looks really well with a black tail. But I'm going to use the UV white. And I like the, I don't know if you can pick it up in here, but there's a purple sheen to it. And I like that because in our Polar Chenille, which we use for our complex twist, there's that same UV whitish purple flash. So it works well together. We'll take two of those strands. Let's see here. I don't know why this white is slightly a thicker crystal flash than the others, but it is. So this is crystal flash. I'm trying to find two really straight ones here. There we go. Just two. Maybe about 5 inches long here, so you have enough for both sides. Okay, so you won't be able to see it on my side necessarily, but this will be the length of the tail. So I'm going to come in on the tire side, do 2 or 3 wraps, and then I'm going to change the view for you guys to the top view and teach you a technique of how I tie in my tail flash that works really well to keep both strands, or however many strands, doesn't matter, on either side proportionally. So slowly I will wrap forward, okay, maybe 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch, doesn't matter, so that you have this gap, if you can see this, between where the tail starts and your crystal flash. Then I run it diagonally to that opposite side, so you're looking at top view, but this would look like this for you, so on the other side, and then I wrap back. And what that should do is keep that flash on that far side. And then I will take my thread, advance it just slightly back to secure that, cut my crystal flash to length, and that's how I do my flash. So if you guys can see that, you have 2 on that side, 2 on there. It's all the flash I use in the tail. There's gonna be so much flash up in the body of this fly that I don't even know if it's needed in the tail, but nonetheless, it's there if you were to want that extra flash. That's up to you. So now we start building our body, and there's several ways to do a complex twist. And there's several patterns that you take every bit of your material for that body, you twist it together, and you wrap forward, boom, done. And that's an awesome way to do it. I choose to do it slightly different. I wrap an underbody of Estaz or cactus chenille, just any type of a body chenille that you want. I prefer like an Estaz because it has those fibers coming out that add flash and bulk. But whatever suits your fancy, you could use a standard large or extra large soft chenille if you wanted to as well. So for the black, I use two different ones, okay? I use the black, UV black, I think it's, is it black pearl? I forget the actual name. And then the olive black pearl, I believe, is what the name of this one is. So one kind of has a green undertone, the other one has that purple. And for this one, I'm going to choose the one with that purple UV look to it. So I'm tying on a Norvise, so there's a couple ways you can do this. I'm going to demonstrate both. So for those that are looking into a Norvise and want to start on the rotary train, which I highly suggest, there's a couple ways of wrapping this body forward to give you the best appearance. Those of you that are using a rotary vise, like a Norvise, I'll show you that technique as well. So I lay this on the opposite side. I use probably 6 to 8 inches of this material. It is a lot of material use, but it is what it is. But I'll have it on the opposite side of me, hanging there. A really great tool that you can have are hair clips. So just women's hair clips, getting materials out of the way and holding them, you know, out of your working area. I suggest picking some of those up at a department store in the beauty section. So that is our chenille. That's going to be our body section. Now we form a twist. So first thing we're going to do, I have one pre-made. We're going to grab another one for the collar, but this is a schlappen feather, quite long one. For the body section, for our twist, you want to pick a feather out of that batch that's long. The feather fibers are roughly the length of the fibers on your Polar Chenille, if you can imagine that. So they're about an inch, inch and a quarter long. Then what I'll do is I'll strip that fluff away from the quill at the bottom, get that out of the way so you don't have to manage it. Hold that feather by the tip, stroke it back, get yourself a good tie-in point, about 3/4 inch, as you can see, kind of in contrast to my t-shirt, and tie that in. And I don't cut that tag, just like we're talking about building that body forward. I want to build a strong foundation. Okay, once we got that feather tied in on my side, we'll take an equal length of the UV Polar Chenille in copper. I love this stuff. Every single color, there's actually a lot of colors that this material comes in, but I love the copper. I think it is the most attractive. I like how copper acts in the water, in tainted colored water, with a lot of tannin from leaves and whatnot in rivers, or a super heavy algae bloom. I still see this flash more than I see like white or black, greens, blues, pinks, oranges. It's a good overall, so I've chosen it on all of them. But again, about a 6-inch section of it. And we're going to tie this in by the tip, if you will. So what I mean is, when you hold this up, you see how the materials slope downward. We'll be tying it in by the section my hand is holding. So we'll call that the tip. A few good securing wraps to get that in. Wrap our thread forward and not too directly behind the cone, but just a little gap. And we'll do a little half hitch to secure our thread. Get our thread over and out of the way. So I'm going to transfer now, okay? I'm going to take our chenille, undo that, capture our twist materials, or schlappen, and the UV Polar Chenille. And then there's 2 ways to advance this body forward, okay? The slow way and the fast way, pretty much, but they both serve a purpose. I tied in that, I tied in the Estaz and put it over to your guys' side, the far away side, and I put the other two materials on my side. The reason is when I make that first wrap of Estaz, I'm capturing those and covering those materials and starting out by covering those thread wraps. So one way you can do it is to somewhat palmer it forward, wrap after wrap. I don't do it super fast even with the Norvise, but I want to make sure that I'm not over crimping fibers as I wrap forward. So I do it kind of slow. It's going to be brushed out afterwards anyway, but just back-to-back wraps up to that thread, leaving a small gap behind that cone, and that would be about right there. So if you guys can see that at all, I'm not sure if you can. I'm not crowding that cone because we have to be able to tie off our twisted materials, and we have to be able to wrap a whole collar of schlappen behind that as well. So just not overcrowding. We want that stuff to go right onto those lead wraps. So I'll make a couple of twists of thread around that Estaz. A few wraps behind the cone. And cut off that excess. Okay, so side note of an awesome tool that you guys can make. I make these out of reclaimed maple wood flooring. I make them in huge batches just to give away because I think they're a super effective tool. But it's just Velcro, self-adhering, adhesive backed Velcro, the hook side. I rip it down to an 1/8 inch thick. They're about 3.5 inches long and then 5/8 wide. This is my dubbing brush, so I taper it both this way and this way to get into tighter spots smaller than that, and then a broad end. And this is your tool for a twisted bugger and pretty much any other fly that you tie. They're really effective and cheap to make too. So I just want to make sure that I got as much of that trapped fiber as I can out. And then I'll brush it forward with my fingers. And the reason that I'm doing this is because when I wrap the twist forward, which I wrap manually always, and I'll explain why, I want those wraps to go down into the Estaz. So in other words, when you tie an intruder style steelhead fly, or you tie small wet flies that have that dubbing ball behind a hackle or a station, that hackle and other wraps are made over to keep that webbed, I'm trying to think of another word for it, but just that webbed look, instead of just folding on itself, you create a dubbing ball, right? Each one of these theoretically act as a dubbing ball. So each wrap you make forward of the twist we're about to make, which is about 4 or 5, that Estaz behind it keeps that profile that you want. Let's get an example here. This is a good example to keep that fly structure when it's in the water. So you're not gonna be able to really pick it up here probably on this camera, but I want a bullet-like profile. I don't want this to slick back to nothing. I want it to move. I want it to undulate, whether it's sitting there just slowly sinking in still water or it's being really, really pulled in a river fishing situation for streamers. That's your goal. So when I do this, like I said, I'll stroke the fibers forward, take that time so that they're as straight up and down as you can. Take out your hair clip, and I'll show you how we make our twist. So we put that feather on first, if you recall. So that's on the bottom. We have our Polar Chenille. We're going to lay that right on top, okay? And I would normally have this down like so, but to show you guys, they're laying nicely on top of each other. I pull tension and I twist it about 5 or 6 times. Then I take our brush, kind of separate some of those schlappen fibers so they're not like grouped together, so I want them all kind of separated. All while holding, and you could use hackle pliers if you want, but you're also adding 2 or 3 inches that you have to manage when you do that. And like I said, for this pattern, I prefer to wrap it manually rather than rotary, and I'll show you why. If I was just sitting with it with hackle pliers down by my stomach and wrapping it forward, it probably wouldn't matter. But hold the core of your Polar Chenille and your quill of your schlappen, Okay, stroke your tail feather back, your two Marabou feathers back, and make one wrap behind that estaz the best you can, and then come back to your starting position. So that's our start. You're not going to see a whole lot back there, but it is a good step. And then I palmer it forward. So each step I sweep back those fibers, and I firmly wrap down like a knife blade into that chenille. And this is about 4 to 6 wraps depending on your shank length and how bushy you want it. And wrap it forward to behind the cone. And you can do this with the rotary function as well, absolutely. There's nothing against it. I just like to keep those materials swept back as much as possible as I wrap forward. So that was a pretty long schlappen feather, but I don't want to crowd that cone as I said before. So I'm going to kind of split those, find a tie-off point. You guys can see right on top here, I haven't crowded that cone. I'm not sure which way I can do this to show, but I can fit this bodkin right down in there, and that's perfect. That's how you want it. Do 2 or 3 thread wraps, progressively getting tighter behind those two materials. Oop. Okay. And 2 or 3 ahead of it to secure it. And cut off the excess of both as close as you can. Otherwise, if you have a quill sticking up in here, making the collar wraps, it'll throw it off and you'll be able to see the quill of your collar feather more than you want. So I try to get behind that cone the best as possible. Sweep my materials back and give 6, 7 turns behind that cone so everything's tied in. Now again, our handy dandy brush, I just get in and I brush forward towards the cone and try to get that estaz to start sticking back out, because when we wrapped this heavier core, see if I can show this to you, this heavier core of the UV Polar Chenille, the white there, and a quill, we're definitely crunching down some of those estaz fibers. So take 20-30 seconds, get in there. You can be violent with it. You will not do anything to this fly. That's why it's an awesome streamer pattern. It's durable. Fish do pretty much nothing to it. It's truly a pattern you could fish all day if you wanted to. And once you are happy with how that looks, like total chaos, sweep it back. And kind of comb it backwards. Okay. So now time for the collar. So as I stated for the twist schlappen going forward, you wanted long. 5-6 inch feather is preferable. For the collar, we're looking for fibers that are longer. So don't worry about the overall length, because you're only going to use 3 to 6 wraps depending on the quality of the feather. You want where the feather fibers are long. A good example of this, let's try to find one that shows this quality. You want it to be slightly longer. So these feather fibers you see up in here, that's our collar. So it's just more decorative. If you were to tie a complex twist bugger like Clark Pierce's and others, they use dubbing and whatnot. I like that transition between that tapered cone and then the tapered feathers. It's just the appeal aesthetically that I like. So let's grab our schlappen and I'll show you how I select that feather. So you have all these longer feathers that you can see on top. Typically what I'm doing is I'm searching down at the base. That's a pretty good one. I'll pull that just in case. That'd be good for either. This is perfect. Okay. So it's usually ones that look really crimped up and kind of straggly. It's because they have really long fibers in that midsection. That's what we want for a collar. This is a perfect collar feather. We'll strip that fluff out of the base, so we have something to hold on to. And since we're only using 4 to 6 wraps, probably about 2 inches of this, we'll strip back about that much, give ourselves the tying point. What I do is I sweep back those feather fibers and put this X, if you will, right on top at our tie-in point. 2 or 3 loose wraps behind that tag in, or the tip of the feather I should say, and then 4 to 6 behind it. And we're going to leave this. So the reason I say that is just for the sake of not wasting feathers. If I plucked this right now, or even cut it, and I did not have those thread wraps really securing it because we are behind a cone and I can't really see down in there, and I go to make a wrap and oh, it comes right out, I would rather pluck this later once I have those hackle wraps, the collar wraps. So I leave that, and it proves to be a pretty good technique for me. So you can do this manually, and the reason I do that is primarily so I can see each individual wrap and make those knife-like hackle wraps. Or you can fold your hackle with your scissors. If you have a rotary, make a half hitch behind that cone. And make your wraps with the rotary function of the Norvise or whatever rotary you have. The key is, though, is every 2 or 3 wraps, what I will do is sweep back and make sure my wraps are not overlapping, because this is all black here, so it does make the contrast, no matter how you look at it or how good your lighting is, pretty poor. I just want to make sure that that quill is nicely going behind that cone where you can't see it, and that's why we don't crowd that cone. So that's perfect. That's how I like it. I don't know how well you guys can see this, but I have the quill pointing towards you, so away from the tire. I'll capture all my material so this stays roughly where it is. Grab my bobbin from my bobbin cradle, make 1, 2 wraps over that quill so that it stays where it's at, and then I tug it just gently. Not too hard, you don't want to break it, but just gently. And what that's doing is forcing that quill down behind that cone in on itself, so that I can then go in and do some wraps ahead of it. Cut that remaining quill, pluck. See how nicely that came out without, screwing it up like I typically would. The tip of the feather. Then that allows us to make any extra brushes that we want, look it over. It lays back those other materials that were chaotic for a while there before we did this collar. And then you can go in and finish your fly how you see fit. You're stacking, if you think about it, you're stacking these thread wraps down into that schlappen, so it doesn't take a ton of wraps with your whip finisher or half hitch, however you do or choose to do your finishing technique. It doesn't take a ton. I don't use any head cement, and I don't use any resin or anything down in there. I never have these things come apart. If I do, at least 3 or 4 of them, because the water and the fish's mouth, teeth, whatever, never get down in that groove. So water's, going over it. The teeth never get up in there. So I've really never had one come unbound. But that overall is a black twisted bugger. And proportionally, when we were talking about hook size and hook choice, I was talking about, and I may have not said it in this live stream, and I apologize because there might be some redundancy for you guys, but right here is where my hackles and like my collar hackle, right? Then I have a tail. So I think of this as 1/2 and then 1/2. If I had a really small hook, these collar hackle fibers and the Polar Chenille would come way back, which is fine if that's the look you're going for, but I like it to be kind of proportional. So I want a defined tail, and then I want a defined body. And what you'll get when it's swimming, either if it's sinking way down in a still water application or being stripped, and then as well as being stripped or swung in a river situation, you're getting this pulsation that you really crave in a lot of streamers without all the materials laying down. So if you notice, when I push down on this material, it pops back up, and that's what you want. You want that that return of the materials. In the tail, we cut out that quill, that little V cut I made. You get a lot more wisp, and undulation in your tail as well. So I hope those techniques, whether you guys tie this exact pattern or you like to tie a lot of other types of woolly buggers or what have you, that you find it useful. But for me at least, sticking to this platform, and it doesn't matter what colors you use, the materials stay the same, and then that way, no matter what color you choose, you're not sitting there reinventing the wheel each time. This green one is the exact same as the black, is the exact same as this, shrimpy colored one. It's the same exact pattern. So the reason I tie a lot of them, and the reason I switch up the colors a lot, and you'll see me post a lot of them and talk about them, is because of the versatility. It's a versatile, pattern in and of itself. Not only because of the movement and the species that you can fish with it. I wouldn't call it a very good leech imitation. It is pretty big, but having that 2 to size 2/0 hook, whether you're fishing largemouth, fishing large cutthroat up in the Puget Sound area, steelhead, like I was showing you guys the egg-sucking leech color combo here, you're golden. So I think next we'll tie one in olive. Might be a little bit easier for you guys to see certain steps because of that lighter color, but I love black ones just as an overall searching pattern the best, and I love these matte black cones from Hairline, so figured I'd tie one of those first. So we'll put a new hook in here. Here's another thing too. Let me take a sip here. Here's another thing to keep in mind. So cone color choice, if I were to pick any cone to have, you probably, or a few I should say, that you can find in shops or online, you're going to have your silver, copper, and gold. Certain retailers, obviously Hairline has quite a few different colors, but certain retailers don't carry them all. So like Spawn Fly Fish up in Washington, which is an online retailer, has your matte black, the pearl white, which I love, it's super awesome, this kind of satin sheened orange, and a few others in the pink, and I think it's the black nickel finish, and then you have your classics like copper and silver. So choose what works best for you. It's a confidence thing. I don't think there's any right or wrong to it, but like when I'm tying a black one like we just finished tying, having that profile of just straight black going all the way back just looks aesthetically pleasing to me. So I choose black, and then same with white, but if you wanted to do silver and white, you don't need to sit there and buy every single color of cone there is to fit your needs. Pick what you think is the most universal and go with it. So I'm going to start out with a copper this time for our olive, because I think olive and copper is a great color combination. We're going to start out with our lead again here. I don't keep it on the spool. I do pluck off a 3-inch section of it or so, which can be wasteful at times, but it's just easier for me to use. I'm going to do 6 wraps, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pluck off that tag end near the cone. Same thing for you guys that did not see the first pattern. I shove this back with some force. Your jaws are going to hold it. The Norvise has no problem with that. And I shove it behind that cone. So just like you noticed, with the black one, as I was tying, your materials are not what are keeping your cone forward. It's not even their job. It's just to butt up against the cone. What's actually holding your cone forward is this lead wrap. So it's a really useful technique anytime, so that you don't have you know, when people, I'll notice, are tying patterns forward and this cone is still moving around and they put a dubbing ball behind it and it's still moving, just put a few lead wraps. And with like the 035, which is what this is, it only takes like 3 wraps to get extended past out back of the cone to make some thread securing wrap. So useful tool. If you wanted to, you know, have this be a super fast sinker that goes to the bottom every time, you could do 10 wraps, you could do 12 wraps. It doesn't matter. It's just, it's a useful technique to keep that cone where it's at. So that's why I do it that way. And we start our thread here, going diagonally to secure that tag end of the lead, pulling forward, if you will, each time we go around. So pull forward towards the eye, pull forward, and that keeps it where it's at. And then I take this tag end and I wrap behind it, just making this little ball, if you will, that secures it. Cut off our tag end of our thread. For those of you who are just joining, I like GSP and nano silk, so like a 50 to 150 denier GSP works totally fine. This is a 12-aught nano silk, which I'm actually about out of this white, so I'm going to switch colors real quick. And I also mentioned that when you're tying these, where your thread is not seen hardly at all, but white is a good choice to go with, so you're not sitting there having to switch out a ton of bobbins. And you can always take a Sharpie, and when you're doing a finishing, you know, your head on any fly or anywhere that's going to be potentially seen, you could take a Sharpie of the color that you want and run 2-3 inches down, make your wraps, your half inches, and call it good, and then you have a colored thread. So this here is orange, that's fine. I'm going to go behind that tag end. And cut off our excess and pluck off this tag end of our lead. Okay, and if it sticks up, which I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's kind of sticking up here, just take your pliers, forceps, whatever you have, and scrunch that down. But that way our cone, no matter what you do, it's secure, it's right up against the eye. You don't have to worry about it anymore. It's not flopping around where you got to sit there and go, oh man, I need to make more dubbing wraps or more hackle wraps or whatever to keep that stable. It's where it's at. You don't have to worry about it anymore. So I don't do a huge thread base. This is a larger hook, so you're going to get a little bit of wobble. If you want to have a perfect center axis, you can drop it down a little bit more, but probably 3 or 4 times front and back is good. And form a small ball of about 6-7 wraps behind, and that's where we're going to tie in our tail. So we're doing olive for this one. Any shade of olive is deadly to me. I like the medium olive from Nature Spirits. And when, again, selecting which feathers to choose, which plumes to choose, I don't want them too bushy, but I don't want them too sparse. Like this is a perfect one. Just has a quality that I like about it. And pick a second one for your second tie-in. Okay, so again, we're going to strip probably about the first third of it. It won't be useful to the tail at all, and it's just getting that excess bulk out of the way. And then another key element to tying in Marabou tails that I find to be incredibly, it just makes a better moving tail. Doesn't matter what you're tying, whether it's a twisted bugger or a standard woolly bugger, is coming in the length of your overall tail, so say 1.25 inches or so, and cutting the quill out and making a V cut. What you're getting inevitably with that is a wispier tail because you don't have that quill running all the way, or roughly all the way, to the tip of the tail. You know, when it gets wet and you sit there with a quill, all of the material is mushing down on that quill, and your quill is what's limiting the movement of that material. So I tie it in with the top of the feather. There's an underside and a top side. I do the top side up. I tie it in about the same length as the overall hook length. Make a couple of securing wraps, 2-3 wraps. Make sure it's on top nicely. And then a few more, a little bit more, more securing wraps. So there's our first plume. We take our second, same thing. I am going to pick a different plume. The reason is I don't like the look of when they have that, where are we, that striation going through them. Just not pleasing to the eye. I doubt the fish would ever care. They don't. But for the sake of pride, we'll pick out a different feather and start over. So this is a good one. Pick out that under feather, that fluff. Make our V-cut and tie it in. So again, we want it to be the same length as that first piece we tied in. I'll go in my offhand, pinch it, kind of look through the hole that's between my index finger and my thumb, make sure they're lined up. I'll do a couple little loose wraps and then sit back and look at it and make sure that the tips line up. Just makes it more aesthetically pleasing, really, is all it is. And then go in and make 3 or 4 securing wraps. So for those of you guys that are just joining us now, one of the things that I like to do is build a cylindrical body. So if you notice here, we have this big bulk up front. It's from our lead wraps, and we have just the hook shank and a few thread wraps behind that. We want to build it up as close to the thickness of where those lead wraps are as possible. You know, we won't get perfect, but this is a technique to get it close. So we'll go up in front of our Marabou quills and wrap up to just behind those lead wraps. Pull our quills forward and twist them between our fingers. Pinch them with our offhand. Make a few securing wraps. So as you can see already, without tying it down, we've already built that bulk up. Just with stuff that we could have cut off back here, we're utilizing it up front. So wrap over that. I do it twice. And then come back to that tie-in point of our tail and cut off this excess up front. Okay, so not perfect. There's going to be some other materials we're going to tie in, like our schlappen, that we'll add to this bulk. But the point being is, instead of having nothing back here and something up front, well, I stated before that it's not going to matter at all because you don't see any of it. And you wouldn't be able to tell that taper as a whole. You're building that foundation for a stronger streamer that you can fish all day, that you don't catch 3 fish on, and then, you know, the fly is exploded, tore apart, and it's like, you know, you spent however many minutes it takes you to tie it, make it durable, you know, and there's ways to do it without a ton of glue and resin. So one thing I'll do with all my tails is I'll lift it just a little bit by coming around it under the underside, pulling forward, and making a couple securing wraps. And now our tail's tied in. That's how I do it. For flash, I like crystal flash. You can use any flash that you desire. Excuse me, it does not matter. But I choose crystal flash. I like the contrast. I like the color options that crystal flash has. I like the twist in it, and I just like how it looks. So a good olive, any olive for this, or even a medium brown actually, which is what I think I'm going to use. This is medium brown crystal flash. There's a brown undertone to it that's kind of coppery, kind of like our UV Polar Chenille. Will kind of match well, but there's also an olive side to it. This is a good choice for brown and olive. Save you some money, so you don't have to have a ton of colors. Actually, for every one of these guys, it's only 4 crystal flash colors. So just a little tip there. We'll cut 2 strands that are at least about 4 or 5 inches long, so you have some material to work with. And straight as possible. Like if they're really curved, when it gets wet and it's being stripped, it is not going to matter. But just aesthetically, when you're tying it, it's nice to have some uniformity to it. So I'll lay them the same length as the Marabou tail on the tire side. So if you can see this, same length as the tail. Make a few wraps, about 2 or 3. And then what I'll do is I'll take this tag end and I'll just make sure that I have it on the side. So I'll just pull it over into place, get it where I want it, and then I'll make 2 or 3 wraps forward towards the eye of the hook, about 16th to an 18th of an inch, or 1/8 of an inch, I'm sorry. And the reason I do that, if you guys did not see me tie the black one, is it allows me to then take my material, go to the opposite side diagonally, and make thread wraps back, and puts that crystal flash right where I want it on the side. And then change, turn your vise and make sure that it's where you want it. But 9 times out of 10, it's going to put it right where you want it. And that's just an easy way to do it instead of making a loop or what have you. Is just wrapping it over itself. It secures it better. You don't have to cut anything over here like a loop, like I see some people do it. And then you can just cut to length. So if you're trying to tie fast, it's the easiest way to do it that I've found. And that I pretty much put flash in any woolly bugger, any streamer with a Marabou tail that I can think of. So it's one of those tips that make tying a lot easier for anything I tie. So there's our flash. Should be equal on each side, roughly. So 2 strands on either side, and there's your tail. So pretty easy. What I will do after I do that is just right over the base of that tail, 3 or 4 wraps. Nice thing about GSP and especially Nano Silk is this is a 12/0 thickness of thread, but it's way stronger than even like a 6/0 or a heavier denier thread without the bulk. So you could sit there and do another 100 thread wraps and you're not going to build up this butt section much, while other threads, as you've seen, 3 wraps is very crucial because you're sitting there adding that bulk that you don't want. So I would highly suggest Semperfli Nano Silk for any fly. I could take this exact bobbin and go over and tie some small caddis pupa right after this. So it's a universal if you don't have a ton of bobbins when you're tying on a Norvise. I happen to have quite a few of them. They're all loaded with Nano Silk, whether I'm tying big steelhead flies or tiny little dries. It's the way to go. So have that color selection, if you're going to have a bunch of bobbins, but make it a universal thread. That's one of the biggest tips I can give, is a universal thread like a Nano Silk. It doesn't take up that much room on your bobbin. You can put the whole spool on it and still be only about 2/3 full, like Norm originally intended the bobbin to be filled, if I remember correctly, and you have a universal thread. So now we're going to start the body. And for that, for the last one, the black, we use this black with that pearlescent purple UV color. I'm not sure if this is actually UV, I can't recall, but has that purple undertone. I love that for the black. But for the green, this pearl olive, I think is the color name, has that green sheen. So for this olive color, that's what I prefer. It gives that dark body underneath. If you can see back in there, more of the silhouette than the actual color, and gives us a good base. So this is Estaz. Guys, if you have cactus chenille, pretty much any chenille like this that has some longer fibers in that 1/4 inch, 3/16 to 1/4 inch range, that's perfect for this. Don't need to get a ton of extra materials if you have something like it. For this, you could use something that's all black. It doesn't matter, as long as you like the look of it, go fish it. Doesn't matter. So I do pluck off some of that material so I can see that core a little bit better. And we don't need to tie in a huge tag end, just a little bit. And we're going to set this on the side away from us. If you weren't here for the last fly, I'll explain why I do that when we make the first wrap of it. But there is our underbody. We'll take this hair clip and secure the tail and that material out of the way. And now we can go in with two other materials that make our twist and don't have any materials bouncing in and out of our way. So for the schlappen for the twist, I used to use the hairline schlappen, the 5 to 7 inch. And we're going to pick 2 feathers. So one of these feathers needs to be long and have relatively long actual fibers, but not super long, just an inch or so. This is a good example of one. This is going to be our complex twist body feather. So probably from where that fluff ends, if you can see that, it's about 4.5, 5 inches from my fingers to the tip. And we need a collar feather. So that's going to be a shorter feather typically. And it's going to have longer feather fibers to make that nice collar that I go for. This is a good example of that. So they typically look more slender, but when you strip back the fibers, they're pretty long, actually about 1/2 inch longer than the one I just picked. So this is a perfect collar feather, more webby, and we're only using 4 to 8 wraps of it depending on what size fly you're tying, and that's perfect. So we're going to set this aside, grab our body feather. You can keep a little bit of this fluff that's almost marabou-y, but for the most part, we're going to strip that off. Give ourselves less material to work around when we tie it off, and make a cleaner body. So strip our feather fibers back, gives ourselves a tie-in point. Lay it on top. You don't need to cut it or anything else. This is going to be just another material to kind of add bulk to the body here, and wrap forward and back. So none of it's going to be seen, just routing a little bit of bulk to kind of match the lead wraps there. That's our reasoning behind it. Then we take our UV Polar Chenille. Again, I use copper for every single one. I love copper, not just with olive, but I like it with every other color combination. It's UV. It doesn't matter if it's a white fly, a black fly, and everything in between. It works well. But that said, you have options here. UV Polar Chenille comes in many different colors. If you want to make an olive one for your flies, go for it. I just choose copper because I only need to buy 1 pack and it works for all of them, and it looks good in the water. It doesn't matter watercolor, visibility, it looks well, or it looks good and works well in all water conditions. So I look at it, if it looks like a tree and those feather fibers are stroked down, I'm going to tie in from the tip, which is what I'm holding. If I tie in from the base down here, it makes it a little bit harder to do the twist and palmer it forward. So tie it in from the tip, just like the Estaz, just a little tie-in point. Put some wraps over it. You're good to go. Now I have on my side, the tire side, I have our complex twist materials. On the opposite side, I have our Estaz, and I'll explain why I separated them like that after I wrap forward. So I'll end about 1/16 of an inch away from the cone. You could slide a bodkin in between your thread and the back of the cone. That's about perfect, so I don't crowd it. If you crowd it, you're going to end up where you're wrapping your collar at the end of the fly, and it's too bulky, so you're going to see your thread and you don't get that bullet-like look that you want. So I would suggest about ending right there. I throw in a 1/2 hitch or 2, and putting your bobbin over to the bobbin cradle out of the way to wrap your Estaz forward. So a couple ways that you can do this. I switch my clip to hold the schlappen and the UV Polar Chenille out of the way to make these wraps. And if you're manually doing it, I would suggest palmering it forward, sweeping back, wrap after wrap, back-to-back wraps, in fact. Or if you have a Norvise or any rotary, you can wrap it forward like so and get it to about where your thread where your thread ends up here. So you have this little bit of a gap. That's the key. Grab your thread from the cradle, wrap it around that material a couple times, come up in front of it, and secure it in place. Easy as that. Trim off the excess, and then I take our brush and fluff that up a little bit. So what we're trying to do is anything that got crimped down by the core of that estaz is getting plucked out. We want that bulk. So here's another one. I was talking about hook selection with these Ahrex Trout Predator line. What you're noticing here is we still have this gap. So when a fish comes up and grabs it and compresses the materials, they're still getting this big hook gap. Doesn't matter if it's a trout, a bass, a steelhead, you have the wire strength that you need for all three of those, no matter what. They're incredibly tough hook, and this is the light, the TP 605 Light Predator streamer hook. But if you were using something heavier, like a 610 or a longer one, like the TP 615, you have adequate hook gap in there. I can slide my entire index finger and less hook misses, less hookups. So once you have that estaz tied in, go in and try to fluff up that estaz so that the fibers, for the most part, are sticking straight up and down. This will help us when we wrap that complex twist down in there. It will help us push those wraps down into that material. So little redundancy here, but in the last one, last fly I tied, I explained the importance of creating this illusion. So we're actually not putting that much material on this hook, but the profile is large in the water, and you want it that way. So if you're tying a little wet fly, or you're tying a steelhead fly that has a dubbing ball or a chenille ball at a station, if you will, and you wrap a hackle or materials or tie in ostrich or rhea or whatever in front of that, you get this webbed pulsation around that dubbing ball. If you don't have that, then your materials collapse when they're being swung or stripped or whatever. And this does, I mean, it will, that's part of the movement of it, it will go down a little bit, but then it always rebounds back up. So you're constantly getting this breathing motion. So something like this green one that we're tying right now, if I were over on, a river like the Deschutes or what have you, while it may not be the most perfect imitation for a sculpin, I would fish this all day. If they weren't hitting the big stoneflies or hitting nymphs down low, I would fish this. It's got that length of a sculpin. It has a broad profile to it, and it's flashy. So if anything, it'll bring out that predatory response in that fish, and they'll hit it hard. So it definitely is one of those flies that is versatile. I love tying sculpin flies, but if it was that time of the day or fish just weren't keying in on the big salmon flies on the surface and I couldn't really get them on a nymph setup, this would be a good fly for this time of the year if there were sculpins in the water or baby trout. So if there was brown trout or big bows keying off, smaller fry or something like that, this, or maybe in a white, depending on your fishery, a small white fish or bait fish in white. So just versatility. Think versatility when you're tying these. Okay, so the twist portion of this, talking about that dubbing ball effect of each wrap being backed by this estaz, your goal is to build that movement. And I've tied it both ways. So some people ask me every once in a while, why don't you put the estaz with this twist and do it all together? You totally could. I don't feel like it gives the movement that I want it to without doing, like Jock just asked, why don't you put it all together? The benefit of it is I have less material in this twist. More of the material of the twist is exposed and doesn't get crimped down, because if I had the core of this down lower with where the Estaz is, that means that the fibers of the UV Polar Chenille and the Schlappen are not as long, if that makes any sense. So I would normally have it down here when I do it. I'll lift it up so you guys can see it. I'll twist these together about 6 times. There's about 3, 4, 5, 6, and you can actually count them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 turns together. It's about right. Take a brush. For this, even a toothbrush would work fine. What we're trying to do is separate when those feather fibers are sticking together in clumps of like 3 to 6. You're getting them to where they open up and aren't clumped together. So this part, as I stated before, I don't do this with the rotary function of any vise. So it doesn't matter what vise you're using. I prefer to do this manually. You could totally spin this up. It's just, I find just that control of the materials and doing it by hand gives it the best effect. So I'll sweep those materials back. I go behind the Estaz, right on top of the base of the tail for the first wrap. Come up, sweep my materials back and make that first wrap forward. Second wrap, third wrap, fourth, fifth, and then right behind the cone. And that should be about the end, as it is, as you guys can see, of the feather. So I'll hold it away from me. I'll kind of pinch those materials. Make one big loose wrap. Just what you're trying to do is capture those 2 materials here. Cinch it, and then go in front of it about 4 wraps. So that's all it takes to really get this tied off. What I do recommend is snipping these materials as close to that cone or the base of them where they're tied off as possible, so that you maintain this gap, so that I can still push my bodkin behind that cone. I'm pushing forward towards the eye of the hook. You want that spacing for your collar. It is just a useful tip, so you don't run out of room and you have enough space. You're trying to get that bullet effect, you know. So as the eye comes up, or from the eye to the back of the cone, it tapers like a bullet, and you want the whole fly to maintain that bulk on all sides. Doesn't matter how the hook is riding, you want it to maintain that profile. So what I recommend is leaving that gap there. So now we take our collar feather, strip off about 1 inch of it or so of material, not the quill itself, so you have that to hold on to, and strip back about 2 inches. So we're only going to make about 6 wraps of this, 6 to 8 roughly, so that should be plenty. What you see hanging out there, that's about right. So here's our tie-in point. I'll sweep back these materials. If you need to wet it down a little bit, do that, so you get a nice tie-in point. I drop this X, you guys can kind of see that, I think of it as an X, right down on top of it where your thread wraps are going to go, and you'll see this cant upward. That's how you know you have it secured, like that. I'll do 3, 1 securing wrap, sorry, 1 loose wrap, 3 securing wraps on top of it, sweep it back, 4 more wraps, and that should be tied in. So one thing I do want to mention that I mentioned before, but a good tip for this: if you were to pluck this right now, just pluck it, start your thread wraps, you have the potential to go to make that first wrap and the feather pops out, and you're like, dang, now I have less of that feather that I already stripped to wrap that collar with. So leave this to start, make your wraps, and then pluck it at the end. It's a really useful tip. I have a tendency of going to make that wrap, pulls right out, darn it, you got to start over or you lose some of that material. So I'll take my scissors, one of the blades, I'll fold that feather so I get more of a knife action when I wrap it down behind that cone. I will either do this manually depending on how the feather lays or with the rotary function. This is the most aesthetic piece of the fly to me. So I do typically go slow, sweep those materials back, and work my way forward behind that cone. I want it to look nice. This is how I do it. Go all the way until that material, the schlappen, is ran out. It's about right there. Come behind the quill, wrap around it, pull taut, make 3 securing wraps. You're good to go. So, and you'll make more wraps, but just to hold that in there. Now, when you pluck this out, the whole feather doesn't unravel. So it's just a really useful technique because you just wrapped thread wraps over it. You did 3 behind it, 4 on top of it, and then you did 4 to 8 wraps of schlappen over it. When you pull that out, it's much more secure. I haven't had them unravel yet, so I may eat my words now, but nonetheless, this is a good technique. Make a few more wraps, cut our tag end, that quill, as close to the cone as we can. Use your whip finisher or finish it off how you choose. I do 4 half hitches. Cinch that down behind the cone. Cut it off. And now we're going to brush out the whole fly. So you can do this brushing out as soon as you do the complex twist wrap forward, or you can do it right now. It really doesn't matter. But it's time to get kind of violent with it. The whole goal is to get as much of that estaz that inside of here has been laid down with those wraps forward, is to get it out. So you can be rough with it, get in there. That's why I like these Velcro brushes that I make. Is you're not going to break this brush. It's made out of maple, so you can get rough with it, but it's also tapered, so I can get in where I'm noticing that it's laid down and get kind of violent with it, trying to get it fluffed back out. So take that time, take a minute or so. You won't damage the schlappen and you don't damage the Polar Chenille because everything is wrapped tightly. And then I sweep it backwards with my fingers and give it a nice little brush. And that's a complex twist bugger. My style, I call it a twisted bugger. It's got characteristics of quite a few patterns. I don't deny that one bit. It's a woolly bugger. If you really want to call a spade, but there are some things that I hope you notice that are slightly different with it to give it this look. So now if you look, that schlappen, it doesn't allow me really to get very far down behind that cone. It creates that bullet profile that looks nice to me. It swims nice that way. The hydraulics of it, or whatever you want to call it, not really aerodynamic, I guess, but in water, when it slicks back, it's got that bullet taper to it, and then it flares back up. So your collar ends up being half the length. So here's about where your hook makes its turn. Half the length of the overall fly, and then the other half is your tail. So all of the material selection is for a reason, but having that hook size, anywhere from about a 2 to a 2/0 is why I pick those size hooks, so that I get this profile that I do. So it kind of has that woolly bugger appearance, but my collar comes to about right here, and then the other half is a tail. Super effective, guys, no matter what color combo you want. Like I said before, this is something I would fish for coastal cutthroat up in Puget Sound. It's got the spawn southern peach marabou in back, your standard orange cone and schlappen, as well as the same UV copper Polar Chenille. And then it's got some orange cactus chenille for the underbody. If I was going to fish purple, exact same thing, same pattern, same process, everything. Different cone color. I chose silver in this case. Might be nickel. I forget exactly, but and then purple. But Estaz for the body in purple, and the UV Polar Chenille. It's just an overall good pattern that I love fishing. I love tying them. It's a confidence fly for me. You know, I can sit there and feel confident that if somebody's like, hey, let's go, you know, smallie fishing tomorrow, let's go bass fishing tomorrow, and I had a box full of these, I feel like I would, you know, have a good chance at actually catching something. If I, you know, was going steelheading, I wouldn't necessarily be my first tie-in choice because I like traditional steelhead flies, but you better be sure that if I were to tie this on, I would have confidence in it. So same thing, just all black, but with an orange cone on it, so you get your egg-sucking leech style pattern. And then for trout, I fish a lot of whites, olives, brown, and black, and then purple for deep. So I hope you guys took something away from this. I love fishing streamers, but I also like flies that are versatile, and so it's awesome to have all of these crazy articulated flies, which you could totally tie this articulated. I have before. But I like flies that are somewhat simple, quick to tie if you were just, you know, whipping this out. Aren't switching gears where you're sitting there tying, okay, this one whole fly pattern, I'm tying it in these 8 colors, and then I got to switch gears. If I had a whole box of just this fly, I feel confident in its ability to catch fish, its durability when it comes to sharp tooth fish, and I can tie it in any color combination you can think of. So I appreciate you watching. I apologize, you guys, for the difficulties in the beginning. You know, we were trying to do something new and different. That'll be next time. You know, we'll get all the bugs out. It worked for us for 3 trial runs, and just, you know, that's fate. We had a backup plan and that failed, and so we're doing it on an iPad now. So I appreciate your guys' patience. I had fun. I hope you learned something. I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you, Tim and Tyler, for having me come on, and your patience as well. And next time, guys, we'll have some new cool stuff that we had planned for you. But before I go, let's venture over here real quick. Excuse the mess. This was supposed to be just a different camera on here. But let's switch camera angle, and I want to show this to you guys in the fly tank here. So let's see here. Switch gears. Okay, so I'm going to move the other camera. So this is the black one that we tied first in the swim tank. So if you notice, you don't have that gap behind the cone. Yes, it's kind of an aesthetic thing, but it creates its own movement when that water can go over that cone and straight into the material. So it maintains that profile, that big bulky profile, no matter how much current's on it. This is more of a river situation, or if you were stripping it, you know, intermittently on a lake. And then the tail, look how the tail moves. The tail would not move that whippy if you had that quill running to the very end. It doesn't move like that. Of course, this is in a cylinder type situation, so, you know, it whips a little bit more if you were letting it drop in a lake and stripping it up, you know, and so on. But this kind of gives you an idea of how those materials work. And then look at that copper. So no matter what color we were to drop in this tank of fly, I would have that copper. And I mean, just look how it shines. It's so good if it's water that's heavily tanned by leaves, you know, decomposing in the fall, or crystal clear, you're going to see that copper one way or another, and that's why I use it. So we'll let it sit here for a second. Again, thank you so much for your patience. You know, things happen, so we got to adapt and overcome, just like fishing situations. What can you do? So next time I'll bring something a little bit different to the table, but in the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.